Standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, your neck cranes upward, trying to take in its impossible scale. The stones fit together so perfectly that not even a razor blade can slip between them. Now picture this centuries before the first pencil sketch or digital rendering, before any modern tool we rely on today. Builders achieved this staggering precision without a single blueprint. How? The answer lies not in lost technology, but in something far more profound: the power of human memory. Ancient civilizations mastered techniques that turned their minds into living libraries, their surroundings into encoded maps, and their traditions into unshakable guides. This wasn't just construction, it was an art form woven into the very fabric of their culture. Think about the last time you navigated your childhood home in the dark. Even without light, you know every step, every turn, because the space lives inside you. Now expand that ability 1,000-fold. Imagine holding the entire layout of a temple complex in your mind, feeling its proportions in your bones, hearing the stories that dictate where each stone should go. For ancient builders, this wasn't imagination, it was daily practice. They used chants, dances, even the stars above as their guides, embedding knowledge so deeply that it could be passed down flawlessly for generations. These weren't just builders, they were poets of geometry, composers of stone. What if I told you that the secrets behind these ancient marvels aren't locked in the past? Their methods still whisper to us today in the way a musician memorizes a symphony or a chef knows a recipe by heart. There's a quiet magic in realizing that the greatest structures ever built weren't just made with hands, but with minds trained to hold entire worlds within them. As we journey through the memory systems of the ancients, you'll start to see familiar landscapes, your own home, your daily routines, with new eyes, because this story isn't just about the past, it's about the untapped potential of human memory, and why, even in our age of digital perfection, these ancient techniques still leave us breathless. Close your eyes and listen, not to the sounds around you, but to the echoes of 1,000 voices rising and falling in precise rhythm. These weren't just songs or stories, they were living blueprints. In ancient Ireland, druids recited verses that held the exact dimensions of a sacred stone circle. In Peru, stonemasons chanted as they worked, their words encoding the angles of each block. Every syllable, every pause carried meaning. Imagine learning to build a cathedral not from parchment, but from poetry, where the rise and fall of your teacher's voice marked the height of an arch, the width of a doorway. This was no casual storytelling. These oral traditions were rigorous, refined over centuries. Apprentices spent years memorizing chants, their accuracy tested by masters who could hear a single word out of place. A misplaced syllable might mean a wall built crooked. A forgotten verse could collapse an entire design, but when done right, the results were flawless. The Incas' mortarless walls, so precise they've withstood earthquakes for centuries, weren't just cut by hand. They were shaped by words passed down like sacred heirlooms. And here's the astonishing part. These traditions weren't just about preserving knowledge. They bound communities together. A Babylonian bricklayer didn't just learn his craft. He inherited the stories of his ancestors, the myths that explained why a temple faced east, or why 12 columns symbolized the moons of the year. Construction became a ritual. Each stone laid a verse in an unbroken hymn. Even today, in remote corners of the world, you'll find elders who can recite building techniques word for word, their voices keeping alive what paper could never fully capture. The rhythm of their speech still holds the heartbeat of forgotten blueprints. Consider the Parthenon, its columns rising in perfect proportion, each curve and angle a silent echo of the Fibonacci sequence. This wasn't just aesthetics, it was mathematics etched into stone, a language the Greeks understood so deeply they could replicate it from memory, but they weren't alone. Across the world, builders wove geometry into the very soul of their structures, turning temples into living equations. Hindu architects, for instance, didn't just design mandalas to meditate upon, they built them. Step into the Brihadiswara temple in India, and you're walking through a three-dimensional mandala, every corridor and spire mirroring cosmic patterns chanted into existence by generations of priests. These patterns weren't arbitrary, they were maps of the heavens, of the human body, of the cycles of time. The Maya aligned their pyramids to the solstices, not with compasses, but by memorizing the sun's path across the sky. A master builder would stand at dawn, watching shadows stretch like celestial fingers, marking where the next stone should lie. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid's sides align with cardinal directions so precisely that modern engineers still debate how it was achieved. Yet the answer might be simpler than we think. The Nile's annual flood left behind geometric grids in the mud, natural blueprints that taught generations how to measure the earth. Ritual transformed these patterns into muscle memory. In Japan, carpenters practiced kikujutsu, laying ropes in sacred shapes to map out shrines without a single written instruction. Native American mound builders traced spirals into the earth, their footsteps etching designs that aligned with lunar cycles. These weren't just construction techniques, they were acts of reverence, a dialogue between the builder and the universe. The stones knew where to go because the builders had sung them into place, danced them into alignment, dreamed them into being. And here's what's truly humbling: these geometric codes weren't locked away in secret texts. They were lived. A medieval mason might carve a rose window by recalling the petals he'd counted as a child, or the way frost crystallized on his workshop window. Nature was the ultimate blueprint, and memory its keeper. When we marvel at these structures today, we're not just seeing stone, we're witnessing a conversation across centuries, one where the language was never written down, but written into the world itself. Picture a Viking shipwright humming under his breath as he shapes an oak plank, his hands moving in time with an ancient chant passed down from his grandfather. The rise and fall of his voice mirrors the curve of the hull, each note a marker for where the wood should bend. This wasn't just melody, it was mathematics set to music. For Norse shipbuilders, these rhythmic chants held the secrets of wave-resistant designs, turning something as fluid as a song into something as solid as a seaworthy vessel. A single misremembered verse could mean the difference between a ship that rode the North Sea's fury and one that shattered beneath it. Half a world away, Byzantine architects faced a different challenge: how to stack stone upon stone until it arched skyward without collapsing. Their solution: hymns. As choirs sang, masons would listen for specific phrases that signaled when to taper a block or adjust an angle. The acoustics of the workspace became part of the blueprint. The way sound bounced off unfinished walls told builders if their curves were true. In Constantinople's Hagia Sophia, where the dome seems to float weightless above the earth, every stone whispers the echoes of those songs. What makes these auditory blueprints so enduring? They tap into something primal about how our brains retain information. A dry list of measurements fades from memory, but a rhyme or rhythm embeds itself like a splinter in the mind. Medieval cathedral builders used rhyming couplets to encode the ratios of stained glass windows. As the rose is to the sky, so 5 parts reach the eye, transforming geometry into poetry. Japanese carpenters memorized shikake phrases, wordplay that doubled as instructions for interlocking joints without nails. Even now, stonemasons in Portugal's Alentejo region chant cantos alentajanos while dry stacking walls. their harmonies keeping centuries-old techniques alive. The brilliance of these systems lies in their fluidity. Unlike static parchment, a song adapts, slowing for precision work, speeding for repetitive tasks. West African bards recounting the construction of Timbuktu's great mosque didn't just describe dimensions, they imitated the cadence of mallets striking clay, letting the rhythm teach the tempo of laying each brick. In the Andes, Quechua weavers still sing patterns into existence, their melodies mapping textile designs so intricate that modern software struggles to replicate them. Perhaps most remarkably, these techniques didn't just preserve knowledge, they democratized it. You didn't need parchment or privilege to learn, you needed only to listen. When Gothic cathedral guilds taught apprentices through call and response chants, they weren't just training craftsmen, they were creating living libraries. Each worker carried a piece of the design in their voice, a collective memory more resilient than any single manuscript. Today, as we fumble with forgotten passwords and corrupted files, there's wisdom in the way a 13th century mason could rebuild a vault from memory alone, guided by nothing more than a childhood song and the certainty that if the notes landed right, so would the stones. Now imagine holding a rope in your hands, your fingers tracing knots tied at precise intervals, each one a number, a measurement, a silent command from the past. This was the genius of the Inca's Quipu, a language spun from string where every twist and color held meaning. Builders didn't just read these chords, they felt them, the knots whispering the dimensions of a fortress or the slope of a terraced field. Unlike ink on parchment, these weren't static instructions. They lived flexing with the tension of a worker's grip, adapting to the terrain underfoot. A quipu could be rolled up and carried into the Andes' thin air, where paper would tear and fade, yet its knots would stay true for generations. But the Incas weren't alone in turning rope into wisdom. Along the Nile, Egyptian surveyors stretched cords between stakes, their lengths calibrated to the royal cubit, a measure derived from the pharaoh's own arm. The rope didn't just mark distances, it embodied them. When workers pulled it taut, they weren't just following orders, they were reenacting a sacred geometry, one that tied the earthly to the divine. The Great Pyramid's near-perfect square, it began with nothing more than a loop of rope and the certainty that if the knots aligned, so would the cosmos. What made these tactile systems so enduring? They married mind and body in a way no blueprint could. A medieval European mason might notch a wooden rod with the key dimensions of a cathedral, his master's stick, running his thumb over the grooves like a blind man reading Braille. Polynesian navigators tied sticks into wave charts, their angles mirroring ocean swells they'd later traverse. Even today, Moroccan tile layers use knotted strings to map the dizzying star patterns of Zellige mosaics, their fingers dancing across the chords like musicians tuning an instrument. The beauty of these tools lay in their humility. A quipu didn't demand literacy, a rope didn't require parchment. They turned knowledge into something communal. A shepherd could not equip as surely as an engineer. A farmer could stretch a survey line as deftly as a priest. And when mistakes happened, the fix was as simple as untying a knot or shifting a stake. No parchment to scrap, no ink to blot, just hands relearning what hands had always known. Perhaps that's why these methods outlasted empires. In the highlands of Peru, elders still teach children to count with knotted strings, keeping the quipu's logic alive. In Kerala, India, temple architects use coconut fiber ropes to lay out sacred geometries unchanged for millennia. These weren't just tools, they were extensions of the human body, turning memory into something you could hold in your hands, something that, even now, tugs at the edges of our digital age, reminding us that the oldest technologies often leave the deepest marks. At dawn in ancient Japan, the first cut of an adze into cedar wood wasn't just construction, it was communion. As shrine builders chanted the Kojiki, the sacred text of creation, each swing of their tools reenacted the gods' shaping of the islands themselves. The pillar placed due east, that was Amaterasu, the sun goddess, rising. The sweeping roof curves, the arch of Izanogi's spear, stirring the primal ocean. Every step was liturgy, every joint a prayer. This wasn't mere tradition. It was neural alchemy transforming raw skill into something as involuntary as a heartbeat. The power of ritual lies in its layered repetition. Consider the Eye's grand shrine, rebuilt identically every 20 years for over 12 centuries. Each generation doesn't just learn the measurements, they become them. Apprentices spend years mirroring their master's movements until their bodies predict grain patterns in timber or the exact angle to notch a beam without a protractor. The knowledge doesn't reside in scrolls but in muscle memory, etched by the rhythm of countless ceremonies. When a master carpenter selects a tree, he doesn't calculate its worth. He hears the echo of his teacher's voice reciting the Norito blessing, guiding his hands to the spot where bark gives way to heartwood. This fusion of sacred and practical created fail-safes modern engineering might envy. In Bali, temple masons still lay stones according to Trihita Karana, a philosophy balancing human, nature, and spirit. A misplaced foundation isn't just a structural flaw, it's cosmic dissonance immediately felt in the disrupted flow of ceremony. Similarly, Navajo Hogan builders orient doorways eastward, not because a diagram dictates it, but because the morning chant, walking into dawn, has steered their ancestors' hands for generations. The ritual is the instruction manual, its cadence more reliable than ink. What's startling is how these methods bypass the fragility of language. When the Babylonians rebuilt temples, they didn't consult archives, they reenacted the Akitu festival, where the king humbly knelt as the gods guided his hands to lay the first brick. The motion survived empires, the meaning didn't need translation. Medieval European masons embedded secrets in the gestures of guild initiations, a handshake here, a tool passing ritual there, encoding vault designs in performances outsiders saw as mere pageantry. Perhaps most ingenious was how rituals scaled complexity. At Cambodia's Angkor Wat, architects coordinated thousands of workers not with blueprints, but by synchronizing their movements to the pinpeat orchestra's tempo. The rhythm section's gongs marked when to lift stones, the flute's pitch signaled alignment checks. Like a conductor's baton unifying an orchestra, the music turned chaos into harmony, proving that memory, when ritualized, could orchestrate wonders beyond any single mind's grasp. Today, we see flickers of this in ballet dancers' muscle memory or surgeons' trained hands, but for ancient builders, these weren't exceptions. They were the rule. When a Japanese master carved the final joint of a shrine, he wasn't just finishing a task. He was stepping into a river of repetition that had flowed for centuries, trusting completely that if the ritual felt right, the structure would stand forever. No signatures marked these works, no patents claimed them. The proof was in the persistence, the way a prayer, repeated often enough, becomes the walls around you. Stretch out your arm, fingers extended from your elbow to your fingertips. You're holding one of history's most enduring measuring tools. The cubit, used from Egypt to Mesopotamia, wasn't just a unit of length. It was a living standard, as unique as the body it came from. When an Egyptian architect pressed his forearm against a block of limestone, he wasn't just measuring, he was imprinting his very essence into the stone. The Parthenon's columns, their fluting mirrors the grooves of a clenched fist, the height of a Gothic arch, often the span of the master builder's outstretched arms, fingertips to fingertips. These weren't approximations, they were intimate translations of flesh into form. Think of the last time you paced a room, counting steps to estimate its size. Now imagine scaling that instinct to something monumental. The pyramids of Giza align with celestial precision, yet their base dimensions trace back to the pharaoh's royal cubit, the length of his forearm plus his palm. No two rulers had identical cubits, yet this variability became a strength. A builder working on the Great Pyramid didn't need a standardized ruler, he carried the measure in his bones. When the monsoon rains swelled the Nile, surveyors would wade into the floodwaters, ropes knotted at cubit intervals stretched between them, turning their bodies into living calipers. This system thrived on its simplicity. A medieval mason laying out a cathedral's nave might walk heel to toe, counting his foot lengths, the pesa to mark the column's spacing. The width of a Romanesque doorway, often the exact height of its carpenter, ensuring every lintel felt instinctively proportionate to those who passed beneath. Even Japan's shoku, derived from the length between thumb and middle finger, wasn't just practical. It tied construction to the human scale. A tea house's ceiling height wasn't arbitrary. It was calibrated to the seated reach of a guest lifting a bowl, blending geometry with grace. But here's what's truly remarkable. These body-based measures weren't crude. They encoded ratios modern architects still admire. The golden ratio appears in the Parthenon's facade not because Greeks calculated it, but because when a raised arm's length divides a man's height, the proportions align. The Vitruvian Man isn't just art, it's a builder's cheat sheet proving the body's symmetry could dictate a temple's. In West Africa, Yoruba builders used the owo, 4-finger widths, to ensure walls tapered at angles that shed tropical rains. No protractor needed, their hands held the math, and the legacy lingers. Next time you climb a staircase, notice how the rise of each step likely matches the average knee-to-floor distance, a holdover from stonemasons who stepped their own limbs into designs. The width of a medieval arrow slit, the archer's shoulder span. Even today, tailors' tape and sewing gauges echo the ancient practice of measuring by hand. These techniques didn't just build structures, they wove humanity into every joint and curve, turning stone and wood into extensions of ourselves. When we marvel at these ancient wonders, we're not just seeing masterpieces of engineering, we're glimpsing the builder's own bodies, immortalized in mortar and memory. Look at a snowflake under a microscope, and you'll see a pattern so precise it feels designed. Yet no two are alike. Ancient builders understood this paradox, that nature's most breathtaking designs emerge from simple, repeating rules. When a Maya architect stacked stones into a pyramid echoing the chambers of a nautilus shell, or an Islamic craftsman tessellated tiles into infinite stars, they weren't just decorating. They were tapping into a universal language, one where symmetry and self-similarity became the ultimate memory aid. Take the fractal geometry of Cambodia's Angkor Wat. From afar, its towers resemble mountain peaks. Up close, the same jagged silhouette repeats in carvings, door frames, even the treads of staircases. This wasn't arbitrary artistry. By adhering to a single proportional rule where each level scaled down perfectly from the last builders, could construct vast complexes without detailed plans. A worker shaping a tiny relief didn't need measurements. He simply replicated the pattern at hand, trusting that if each piece mirrored the whole, the entire structure would harmonize. Nature offered the ultimate cheat sheet. The branching veins of a leaf reappeared in Gothic cathedral vaults, their ribs spreading like oak limbs to distribute weight. Roman aqueducts mimicked the fractal branching of river systems, their channels narrowing in perfect ratios to maintain flow. Even the humble beehive, with its hexagonal cells, inspired the honeycomb patterns adorning Mughal palaces. A design so structurally sound it required no calculations, just observation. But here's the genius: these patterns weren't just copied, they were internalized. An Andean weaver creating a compi textile didn't sketch the intricate fractal motifs first. Her hands moved instinctively, the rhythm of the loom echoing the recursive spirals of alpine ferns. Similarly, when Navajo sand painters mapped out ceremonial designs, the symmetry acted as a mnemonic, each quadrant mirroring the next, so that completing one quarter automatically guided the rest. This principle scaled magnificently. The great mosque of Cordoba's hypostyle hall, with its forest of identical arches, could expand endlessly because each new column followed the same rule as the last. No master plan was needed, just the unshakable logic of repetition. Compare that to modern construction, where a single misplaced beam can derail an entire project. Ancient builders had a safety net woven into the very fabric of their designs. If you strayed from the pattern, the error announced itself. A misaligned tile in the Alhambra's mosaics would disrupt the flow like a wrong note in a symphony, instantly visible to any craftsman raised on these visual rhythms. Perhaps most remarkably, these techniques bridged cultures separated by oceans. The spiral staircases of Celtic round towers and the step terraces of Mesoamerican pyramids both obeyed the Fibonacci sequence, not because ideas traveled, but because builders' eyes kept landing on the same spirals in sunflower heads and galaxy arms. Symmetry became a shared vocabulary, one that required no translation. When a Persian architect laid out a garden with 4 quadrants divided by water channels, he was using the same inherent balance as a Zen monk raking gravel into concentric waves. Both knew the human brain recognizes and remembers what it already sees in the world. Today, we've digitized this wisdom. Computer-generated fractals design earthquake-resistant skyscrapers. Algorithms optimize solar panel layouts based on leaf patterns. But something intangible was lost when we outsourced this knowledge to machines. The medieval mason who carved a rose window didn't just replicate nature. He communed with it, letting the petal's radial symmetry guide his chisel as surely as his pulse. His blueprint wasn't on parchment, but in the very way his eyes traced the veins of a maple leaf or the ripples of a pond. To walk through these ancient spaces is to witness a dialogue between human hands and the deep geometry of the universe, one where every line, every angle whispers, "Remember." This is how the world builds itself. In the dim light of a medieval workshop, a 12-year-old apprentice presses his blistered hands into damp clay, shaping it under his master's watchful eye. This isn't just training, it's transformation. Every knead of the material, every flick of the wrist etches techniques deeper than any parchment could. Gothic cathedrals didn't soar skyward because of drafted plans, but because generations of stonemasons carried the craft in their hands, their muscles remembering what their minds might forget. The curve of an arch, the angle of a buttress, these weren't just taught, they were tattooed into the body through relentless repetition. Consider the journey of a journeyman in Chartres, France, spending 15 years carving the same type of capital before being trusted with a keystone. His master wouldn't explain the geometry of weight distribution. Instead, he'd place the chisel in the apprentice's palm, guiding his strikes until the stone sang under the hammer. Failures weren't just mistakes, they were lessons written in shattered rock. When the apprentice finally felt the perfect resistance of limestone yielding at just the right angle, that knowledge became instinct, passed down like a heartbeat. This system thrived on layered learning. A Byzantine mosaicist didn't start with gold tesserae. He spent years sorting glass fragments by hue, his fingers learning color theory through touch. Japanese Miyadaku temple carvers began by sharpening tools for a decade, their hands internalizing the steel's grain before ever touching sacred cypress. The delay wasn't inefficiency, it was ensuring that when the moment came to carve a joint so precise it needed no adhesive, The hands would move with the certainty of tides. But here's what modern engineering overlooks. This mentorship wasn't rigid. When a Norman architect encountered unfamiliar volcanic stone in Sicily, he didn't consult a manual. He adapted techniques honed on French limestone, guided by a master who'd faced similar challenges. The living library of apprenticeship could rewrite itself. Venetian glassmakers adjusting to Baltic ash, Persian masons incorporating earthquake-resistant flex into their brickwork. Each innovation was absorbed into the body's repertoire, then passed onward. The true brilliance lay in how these traditions balanced secrecy with survival. Gothic flying buttresses weren't diagrammed in guild halls. Their secrets lived in the calloused hands of senior masons, who demonstrate the critical angle by tilting a palm during a ceremonial toast. Japanese joinery masters taught through riddles, listen to the woods whisper when the north wind blows, ensuring only those truly immersed could decode the lesson. Yet this exclusivity preserved standards. A Florence cathedral built by a Capamaestro's trained eye didn't need inspections. The very fact it stood proved the knowledge had been transmitted whole. Today, we've swapped this embodied wisdom for standardized tests and CD certifications, but something vital slips through the cracks. Watch a fifth-generation dristone waller in Scotland place rocks without a level, his hands sensing balance like a pianist finds middle C. Or a Balinese undoggy priest builder aligning a temple gate by the shadow of his outstretched arm at dawn. These aren't antiquated skills, they're the culmination of lifetimes compressed into gesture, proving that the most resilient technology isn't stored in servers, but in the silent dialogue between a master's nod and an apprentice's grasp. The stones of Notre Dame remember this. When fire ravaged its roof in 2019, the restoration didn't begin with blueprints. It started with the few remaining compagnons who could still hew oak beams using 12th century methods, their muscles tracing motions learned from elders who'd learned from elders. In their blisters and sweat, the cathedral's true blueprints lived on, written not in ink, but in the body's stubborn, beautiful memory. Standing in the pre-dawn chill at Stonehenge, your breath fogs the air as the first sliver of sunlight slices between the massive sarcens. That precise alignment where the heel stone frames the rising solstice sun wasn't luck. It was celestial engineering, a marriage of stone and sky repeated across continents. From the sun daggers of Chaco Canyon to the solar corridors of Angkor Wat, ancient builders didn't just observe the heavens, they wove them into the very bones of their cities. The sky wasn't a backdrop, it was the master architect, and human hands merely followed its lead. Consider the precision required to align Egypt's great temple of Ammon so that the rising sun on the winter solstice floods its inner sanctuary, illuminating statues hidden in darkness all year. No GPS, no theodolites, just generations of priests tracking the sun's slow dance across the horizon. Their tools, notched bones recording lunar cycles, obelisks casting measured shadows, and stories passed down like celestial heirlooms. When a Maya astronomer priest calibrated El Castillo pyramid at Chichen Itza to cast a serpent-shaped shadow during equinoxes, he wasn't creating spectacle. He was encoding sacred knowledge into architecture that would teach long after his voice faded. These alignments served more than ritual. They were practical calendars etched in stone. Newgrange's Passage Tomb in Ireland funnels winter solstice light into its deepest chamber for exactly 17 minutes, a fleeting moment that marked the rebirth of the year for Neolithic farmers. In Peru, the 13 towers of Chanquillo functioned as a solar calendar, their jagged silhouette tracking the sun's annual journey like a stone sundial stretching across the desert. The genius lay in simplicity. Any observer could read the seasons by watching which tower glowed at dawn. But here's what modern skywatchers often miss: these celestial designs weren't static. They accounted for celestial drift over centuries. The builders of Karnak adjusted their temple axes over generations as the Earth's tilt shifted. Babylonian ziggurats were realigned to compensate for the slow wobble of the poles. This wasn't just astronomy, it was a dialogue with time itself, where each generation refined what the last had memorized. The true marvel, these sky-stone conversations transcended language. When a Polynesian navigator guided his canoe by starlight to Easter Island, he used the same star paths that the Moai statue's creators had referenced to orient their Ahu platforms. Separate continents shared logic. The Dogon people of Mali built granaries aligned to Sirius centuries before telescopes revealed its companion star, knowledge preserved not in books, but in the rhythmic dances that mirrored celestial orbits. Today, we've outsourced navigation to satellites, but the legacy lingers. When sunlight pierces Manhattan skyscrapers during Manhattanhenge, or a modern sundial's shadow touches a noon marker, we're glimpsing the ancient truth. The sky still holds the oldest blueprints. And perhaps that's why these sights stir something primal in us. They remind that we once all spoke the same language, written not in words, but in the tilt of a pillar, the gap between stones, the patience to watch the stars until they whispered where to build next. Beneath the roaring crowds of the Colosseum, hidden in plain sight, lies a secret as simple as a child's toy: modularity. Each towering arch, every stacked tier, repeats like a chorus in a song. Identical blocks of travertine stone, mass-produced and interchangeable. This wasn't just efficiency, it was memory crystallized into form. Roman engineers didn't reinvent the wheel with each project. They mastered a system where standardized parts became the alphabet of empire building. A column drum from a dismantled temple could find new life in an aqueduct because the dimensions were etched into the collective muscle memory of every stonemason. Think of it like ancient Lego, a system where the pieces always fit, no instructions needed. The Pantheon's coffered dome, a radial pattern of identical concrete boxes, reducing the brain's workload to one memorized module, repeated 42 times. Even the humble Roman brick, stamped with imperial seals, followed strict ratios: 1 foot by 1 foot by half a foot. A builder could work blindfolded and still lay them true. This modular mindset transformed construction into a language where every artisan, from Hispania to Syria, spoke the same grammatical rules. But here's the brilliance: standardization didn't stifle creativity, it unleashed it. Like a poet working within a sonnet structure, Roman architects composed symphonies from repetition. The theater of Marcellus stacked the same arched module 76 times, yet no two levels feel identical. The secret: context. Just as Lego bricks build both castles and spaceships, Roman modules adapted to their setting. A barrel vault in a bathhouse became a triumphal arch on the Via Appia, all because the builders internalized the system so deeply they could improvise like jazz musicians. This approach had a hidden advantage: resilience. When earthquakes toppled walls in Pompeii, reconstruction was swift because replacements were pre-sized. Legions on the move could erect forts in days using prefabricated gate modules. Even the Colosseum's hypogeum, the labyrinth beneath the arena, was built like a kit with interchangeable trapdoors and pulley slots. The real innovation wasn't the materials, it was the mental framework that turned chaos into patterns, letting builders scale from humble basilicas to the majesty of the Basilica of Maxentius without missing a beat. Modern engineering owes more to this ancient logic than we admit. Your smartphone's modular components, IKEA flat pack furniture, even the metric system, all echo Rome's Lego principle. But something profound was lost when we swapped memory for manuals. A Roman mason didn't need a ruler, he knew the pes in his stride, the pomma in his palm. Today, we have precision down to the micrometer, yet we've forgotten how to hold the measure of things in our hands. The Colosseum stands as a testament to what happens when knowledge doesn't just live on paper, but in the very rhythm of how we build, one repeatable, perfect block at a time. Walk into Chartres Cathedral, and your gaze instinctively rises to the kaleidoscope of its rose window, but what you're really seeing is a structural secret whispered in stained glass. Each petal of that radiant mandala corresponds to the precise angle of the vault ribs below, their curvature mathematically mirrored in the leaded panes. This wasn't just beauty, it was engineering in plain sight, a sacred cipher where geometry and divinity became one. The medieval masons who designed these windows weren't merely artists, they were guardians of an oral tradition that translated weight and thrust into spirals and saints. Half a world away, a Hindu sculptor chiseling the dancing Shiva into a temple wall was doing something remarkably similar. Every fold of the deity's garments, every angle of his bent knee, held the proportional ratios of the temple's foundation. To the uninitiated, it was religious art. To the builders, it was a living textbook where the spread of Vishnu's arms encoded the ideal width-to-height ratio for a gateway, and the lotus petals beneath Lakshmi's feet prescribed the curvature of domes. These weren't arbitrary symbols, they were mnemonic devices turning mythology into a ruler and compass. The brilliance of this system lay in its dual purpose. In Byzantine churches, the labyrinthine floor mosaics that pilgrims walked as penance also mapped the building's acoustic hotspots, the swirls marking where a chant would resonate strongest. Islamic muqarnas vaulting, those mesmerizing honeycomb ceilings, weren't just decorative. Their fractal patterns guided masons in distributing weight without calculations. Even the zigzagging chevrons on Romanesque archivolts served as memory aids, their peaks and troughs indicating where to thicken walls against lateral forces. But why hide structural knowledge in symbolism? The answer lies in the sacred professional divide. In an age where literacy was rare and guild secrets fiercely guarded, embedding formulas in art ensured only the worthy could access them. A Norse shipwright carving interlaced beasts onto a keel wasn't just warding off spirits. The number of twists in the serpent's tail dictated the optimal lapstrake overlap for stormy seas. Tibetan monks constructing mandala-shaped stupas knew that the concentric circles holding Buddhist cosmology also functioned as stress diagrams, the outermost ring marking where buttresses should bear the dome's load. The real magic happened when these symbols traveled. The same spiral that strengthened Celtic brooches appeared in the ramps of Egyptian pyramids, both tracing the golden ratio's unbreakable logic. Chinese lattice windows, with their seemingly abstract geometric perforations, secretly charted the wind patterns that would ventilate a courtyard house. No blueprints needed, just generations of artisans trained to see the world as interconnected patterns, where every curve and intersection held latent instructions. Perhaps most remarkably, these encoded designs still speak to us across centuries. When a restoration team at Venice's St. Mark's Basilica noticed that certain mosaic saints always appeared where cracks formed, they realized the medieval artisans had used the icons as fault line markers. The rose in Gothic windows wasn't just floral symbolism, it was a radial force diagram, its petals pointing precisely to where the next flying buttress should land. Even the repetitive knotwork adorning Viking runestones secretly mapped the grain direction of load-bearing timbers. Today, as we scan QR codes for assembly instructions, there's humility in recognizing how much deeper these ancient systems ran. A Navajo sand painting symmetry didn't just represent cosmic order. It taught the Hogan builder how to layer logs in self-reinforcing circles. The maze etched into the floor of Rheims Cathedral wasn't merely a meditation path. Its turns corresponded to the hidden piers beneath the floor. These builders didn't separate art from function, sacred from practical. For them, every chisel stroke was a prayer, every pattern a blueprint, and every symbol, no matter how mystical, a way to make stone remember what paper could not. Climbing the step terraces of Borobudur is like turning the pages of an ancient manuscript, each level a new chapter in the story of enlightenment. As pilgrims ascend past 2,600 intricately carved panels, they don't just see Buddhist teachings, they walk through them, their footsteps tracing Siddhartha's journey from prince to Buddha. The temple isn't merely a container for sacred stories. It becomes the story itself, its very architecture a three-dimensional parable. The builders didn't need scrolls to preserve this wisdom. They etched it into stone pathways that unfold like a sacred flipbook, where every turn reveals another piece of the cosmic puzzle. This narrative approach transformed construction into an act of storytelling. In Egypt's Temple of Horus at Edfu, the walls don't just depict myths, they stage them. Visitors moving through the hypostyle hall reenact the god's triumph over chaos, passing through progressively lighter chambers until emerging into the sunlit sanctuary, mirroring the dawn of creation. The Maya did something similar at Capon, where the hieroglyphic staircase recounts dynastic history not just in its carvings, but in its very ascent, each step a generation, the riser's height marking the ruler's stature. The structure itself became a chronological scroll in stone. What made these architectural stories so unforgettable? They engaged the body alongside the mind. At India's Ellora caves, pilgrims squeezing through narrow tunnels symbolizing the womb of the earth goddess emerge into caverns painted with celestial visions, a physical metaphor for rebirth. Greek initiates at Eleusis followed a labyrinthine path mimicking Persephone's descent into the underworld, their disorientation mirroring her journey before the revelatory climax in the torch-lit telesterion. These weren't passive experiences, they were full sensory narratives where the architecture directed both movement and meaning. The genius lay in how these designs accommodated multiple layers of understanding. A medieval Christian pilgrim circling Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth might focus on the penitential journey, while a stonemason saw the same path as a guide for laying radiating chapels. Borobudur's mandala plan works similarly. Devotees see Mount Meru's symbolic form, while builders recognized it as a structural schematic ensuring perfect load distribution. Even the temple's hidden base depicting earthly desires served dual purposes, spiritual allegory for monks and a drainage system blueprint for engineers. Perhaps most remarkably, these story buildings transcended language barriers. When illiterate Spanish conquistadors encountered Tenochtitlan's Templo Mayor, they didn't need Nahuatl translators to grasp its layered symbolism. The twin shrines to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli visibly enacted the Aztec cosmos balance between rain and sun. Similarly, Angkor Wat's bas-reliefs illustrating the churning of the ocean of milk double as construction diagrams, their swirling figures mirroring the interlocking stonework techniques used throughout the complex. Today, we've fragmented these unified experiences. Modern museums separate artifacts from their architectural context, while theme parks simulate sacred journeys as entertainment. But echoes remain in the stations of the cross guiding worshippers through church aisles, or the Hajj ritual circumambulation of the Kaaba. These living traditions remind us that the most powerful buildings were never just shelters. They were scripts written in space, waiting for human movement to bring their stories to life, one step, one turn, one ascending terrace at a time. Deep beneath the island of Malta, in the labyrinthine chambers of the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, something extraordinary happens when you hum a low E-flat. The sound doesn't just echo, It swells, vibrating through the limestone until the entire chamber seems to sing. This isn't accidental. Archaeologists have discovered that certain frequencies resonate so perfectly here that they illuminate carved niches invisible in normal light, their hidden patterns revealed only when the correct tone shakes the dust from their edges. For the builders who carved this sacred space 5,000 years ago, sound wasn't just decoration. It was a tool as precise as any modern laser level. Picture a team of Neolithic masons tapping a freshly placed slab with a mallet, their ears attuned to the subtle differences between a dull thud and a clear, ringing tone. The right pitch meant the stone sat flush, its edges perfectly aligned. The wrong one signaled a gap invisible to the eye. In Peru, Inca builders used a similar technique, striking rocks with bronze hammers until they emitted identical pitches, a sonic signature proving the blocks would fit without mortar. Even the Great Pyramid's interior chambers hum at frequencies that correspond to natural harmonics, suggesting its builders didn't just stack stones, they tuned them. This acoustic precision went beyond practicality. In Greece's Epidaurus Theatre, a coin dropped on the stage can be heard clearly in the back row, not just because of the seating shape, but because the limestone was selected for its resonant properties. The builders didn't have decibel meters, they had generations of accumulated knowledge about how sound travels through stone. When Byzantine architects designed Hagia Sophia's dome, they embedded hollow clay pots into its curvature, creating a reverberation that made chants sound heaven-sent. The structure didn't just amplify voices, it transformed them into something transcendent. What's startling is how universal this practice was. From Ireland's Newgrange, where the passage tomb amplifies winter solstice chants, to Chavin de Huanta's underground galleries in Peru, where conch shell trumpets played at specific angles send eerie harmonics snaking through the corridors, ancient builders treated sound as both blueprint and builder. The Maya even engineered their ball courts so the impact of the rubber ball would produce thunder-like echoes, turning a game into a celestial dialogue. Modern science is just catching up. Researchers using 3D scans of Malta's hypogeum found that its chambers act like a giant Helmholtz resonator, a device that amplifies specific frequencies. But the real revelation, the oracle chamber, where a voice speaking at 55 Hz, the frequency of a male baritone, triggers vibrations that ripple through the body, creating an uncanny sensation of sound coming from within the bones. This wasn't just architecture, it was neuroacoustics millennia ahead of its time. The lesson these spaces teach us is profound. In an age where we rely on screens and sensors, we've forgotten how much information vibrates in the air around us. The next time you knock on a wall to find a stud, or tap a glass to check its quality, you're tapping into that ancient wisdom, the instinctive understanding that the world speaks in frequencies, and sometimes the best way to build is simply to listen. In a small village in the Gambia, the rhythm of hammers striking clay isn't just noise, it's a living textbook. As women pack earth into the walls of a new roundhouse, their voices rise and fall in a centuries-old song, each verse encoding the ideal thickness for monsoon season or the right angle to thatch the roof against Harmattan winds. This isn't just music, it's a communal hard drive where every elder, every child becomes a backup for irreplaceable knowledge. The lyrics don't just describe techniques, they are the techniques, transforming a melody into mortar and a chorus into construction. Across the Pacific, Polynesian canoe builders took this even further. When raising the Great Halau sheds to house voyaging vessels, entire villages would divide the construction song into overlapping parts, like a musical jigsaw puzzle. One group sang the timber measurements, another the lashing patterns, a third the sacred protocols for tool consecration. No single person knew the whole song, making forgetfulness impossible. If a master builder passed suddenly, the community didn't panic, they simply gathered, and like neurons firing in a collective brain, the complete knowledge emerged from their united voices. The brilliance of these systems lay in their redundancy. In the Himalayas, Sherpas still teach avalanche-resistant stone stacking through call and response chants during Yongda festivals. Children learn verses about load-bearing angles long before they touch a rock, ensuring the knowledge propagates organically. Similarly, Berber communities in the Atlas Mountains embed earthquake-proofing techniques in wedding songs, literally weaving survival wisdom into celebrations, so even in joy, the next generation absorbs how to keep their homes standing. This approach had unexpected benefits. Unlike static blueprints prone to decay or loss, living memory adapted. When Zuni Pueblo builders encountered Spanish-introduced adobe bricks, they didn't discard their songs, they added new verses, folding innovation into tradition without breaking rhythm. In Mali's Dogon country, where every house mirrors the cosmos, elders update astronomical references in building chants as celestial alignments shift over centuries. The knowledge stayed current because it breathed with the people who carried it. Modern disaster recovery teams are now rediscovering this wisdom. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, builders trained in sung techniques reconstructed homes faster than those waiting for architectural plans because their blueprints lived in the songs they'd known since childhood. In Scandinavia, Sami Lavu tent makers preserve nomadic memory by teaching pole configurations through lullabies, ensuring even toddlers absorb spatial concepts most adults struggle to sketch on paper. There's profound resilience in this shared custody of knowledge. When a fire destroyed the Maori meeting house Te Hau Kaituranga in 1868, the community didn't need original drawings to rebuild. They had the Waiata, the songs that had guided its first carving 30 years prior. Every scrollwork pattern, every post placement still lived in the collective voice. Today, as digital files corrupt and cloud servers fail, these ancient oral systems quietly outlast them, proving that sometimes the most durable storage device isn't a disk or a drive, it's the human heart, beating in time with a song older than written words. At sunset, when the Taj Mahal's white marble glows pink in the reflecting pool, you're witnessing more than beauty, you're seeing ancient engineering in its purest form. That mirror-like surface wasn't just for postcard views, it was the builder's ultimate level. By aligning the mausoleum's minarets with their inverted reflections, Mughal architects achieved near-perfect symmetry without a single surveying instrument. The water didn't just show the structure, it corrected it, revealing even the slightest tilt in real time. This genius trick echoed across cultures. The Romans floated bronze discs in temple foundations to check flatness, while Chinese garden designers used lotus-filled ponds as living protractors, adjusting pavilion angles until the ripples spread evenly in all directions. Water's unerring obedience to gravity made it the world's oldest and most reliable level. Inca engineers channeling spring water through Machu Picchu's terraces didn't need bubble vials, they simply watched how the liquid clung to carved stone grooves, its meniscus betraying any unevenness. Venetian builders laying the city's foundations relied on tidal patterns, timing their work to the Adriatic's ebb and flow. Even the curved aqueducts of Petra functioned as giant spirit levels, their sandstone channels cut so precisely that a single drop of water could reveal a slope error thinner than a hair. But the true mastery lay in harnessing water's dual nature as both mirror and messenger. When Byzantine architects dug cisterns beneath Constantinople, they filled them first to observe how candlelight reflected off the ceiling, exposing structural flaws before the dome was sealed. Japanese carpenters still use the Mizubiki technique, stretching wet ropes between beams. As the fibers dry and contract, they pull misaligned joints into perfect harmony. The Maya went further, constructing ceremonial pools like the cenote Sagrado at Chichen Itza as celestial mirrors, their still surfaces capturing the moon's path to calibrate pyramid alignments. This fluid intuition birthed some of history's most enduring structures. The Pont du Gard's three-tiered Roman aqueduct descends just 34 centimeters per kilometer, a gradient so slight that modern engineers struggle to replicate it without lasers. Yet its builders achieved this by observing how water behaves in a tilted bowl. Too steep and it rushes, too shallow and it stagnates. They found the Goldilocks zone where liquid flows patient and sure, turning physics into poetry. Perhaps most remarkably, these techniques still ripple through modern construction. The glassy pool surrounding the Lincoln Memorial isn't just decorative, it's a seismic stabilizer. It's water-absorbing vibrations from the swampy ground beneath. When restoration teams at Versailles needed to verify the Hall of Mirrors alignment, they used 17th-century methods, pouring mercury onto glass sheets and watching how the liquid metal pooled. Even today's laser levels owe their existence to that first builder who noticed how still water never lies, how its surface, given time, always finds true. At the temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak, dawn on the winter solstice transforms a simple corridor into a celestial timepiece. As sunlight pierces the hypostyle hall's shadowed columns, it paints a golden path straight to the inner sanctum, illuminating the god statue for exactly 12 minutes before retreating. This precision wasn't mystical guesswork, it was stone-cold engineering. The Egyptians didn't just build with the sun, they negotiated with it, using obelisks as giant sundials whose shifting shadows dictated when to lay foundations, align walls, or consecrate chambers. A single shaft of light could signal it was time to shift construction northward by a hand's breadth, or delay work until the equinox evened the balance of day and night. These solar markers were more than calendars, they were active collaborators. In Abu Simbel, Ramses II's architects positioned the temple so that twice a year, sunlight would reach 60 meters into the mountain to spotlight statues of Ptah, Amun, and Ramses himself. But here's the catch, the fourth statue, the god of darkness, always remained in shadow. This wasn't just symbolism, it functioned as a built-in error detector. If Ptah's face failed to light up at the appointed hour, builders knew to check their alignment against the obelisk's noon shadow outside. The stones themselves became critics, their silence louder than any foreman's shout. The technique scaled beautifully. Roman builders embedded bronze discs called solarium in forum pavements, their shadows acting like our hands on a giant sundial to coordinate deliveries of mortar and marble. At Choco Canyon, the ancestral Pueblones designed petroglyph spirals that, when struck by solstice sunlight, projected sun daggers onto precise points, nature's laser-level guiding masonry work. Even medieval cathedral builders relied on light cues. The rose window at Chartres casts a kaleidoscope of shadows on the nave floor during summer mornings, its patterns revealing if the latest vault ribs were distorting the intended symmetry. What modern architects might overlook is how these systems embraced imperfection. Unlike our obsession with millimeter precision, ancient builders understood that sunlight moves differently in December than June. The Mayans calibrated their zenith tubes of vertical shafts in temples like El Caracol to account for the sun's seasonal wobble. When no light passed through at high noon, they knew the dry season had arrived, signaling it was safe to harvest limestone without moisture weakening the quarried blocks. The very variability we'd consider a flaw became their most reliable tool. The legacy lingers in unexpected places. Next time you notice a sundial in a public square or a stripe of sunlight sliding across your floor at the same time each day, you're witnessing the same principles that once directed the hands that raised the Parthenon. These builders didn't fight the sun's movement, they danced with it, letting light sculpt their designs as surely as their chisels did the stone. In an age of GPS and laser levels, there's humility in realizing that the oldest guidance system still works perfectly, provided we're willing to stand still long enough to read its rays. Dig your fingers into a palm-sized clay model of a ziggurat, its stepped sides rough under your touch, and you're holding an ancient architect's thought process made solid. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of these miniature prototypes, some no larger than a loaf of bread, each groove and ridge encoding critical structural knowledge. These weren't just decorative artifacts, they were working models where a builder could press his thumb into a wall's curve to test its slope, or snap a tiny column to gauge its failure point before committing to tons of stone. The cracks spoke volumes. A split along the base signaled where to thicken foundations, while an unbroken dome proved the design could shoulder its own weight. This hands-on approach transformed abstract concepts into physical intuition. When Egyptian engineers planned the bent pyramid's unique angle change, they likely molded scale models in Nile silt first, feeling how the steep lower section transitioned to the shallower cap. The surviving trial piece from Dosha, a limestone block carved with multiple gradient options, shows this tactile testing in action. Each chiseled line represents a what-if scenario, a three-dimensional spreadsheet where stress points became something you could run your fingers over. Roman aqueduct planners took it further, building miniature lead pipe networks in sandboxes to observe water flow dynamics before cutting a single stone. The brilliance of these models lay in their accessibility. Unlike parchment scrolls locked in temple archives, a clay prototype could be passed around a work site, its lessons instantly graspable to illiterate laborers and master masons alike. Viking shipwrights shaped wax hulls to test how they'd handle North Sea swells, while Anasazi architects in Choco Canyon stacked tiny sandstone walls to experiment with mortarless joints. The tactile feedback was immediate and unambiguous. A leaning wall model didn't need translation. Modern engineering is rediscovering this wisdom. Architects at MIT's Media Lab now 3D print polymer prototypes that mimic the squishiness of full-scale materials, letting them physically manipulate structures like their ancient predecessors did. Japanese seismic researchers build miniature pagodas on shake tables, observing how each tier sways, a direct descendant of when 7th century Horyuji temple carvers tested earthquake resistance by stacking wooden blocks. Even NASA Mars habitat designs begin as handheld models, proving that sometimes the most advanced technology is the one that fits in your palm. What these ancient builders understood, and we're relearning, is that the hand thinks differently than the eye. A medieval mason turning a walnut-sized gargoyle model in his palms wasn't just visualizing details. His fingers were calculating weight distribution, wind resistance, and tool access in a language deeper than numbers. When Chinese architects shaped miniature courtyard houses from scented cedar, the aroma itself became part of the design process, evoking how living spaces should feel. These weren't just models, they were memory palaces you could hold, where every dent and ridge told a story no flat blueprint ever could. Perhaps that's why children instinctively build with blocks before they can draw straight lines. There's something primal about understanding space through touch, about learning structural truth not through equations but through the creak of a tiny bridge bearing pebble traffic. The Mesopotamians knew this when they pressed cuneiform receipts into their clay models, merging accounting with architecture in one tactile object. Their greatest innovation wasn't the ziggurate's form, it was the realization that sometimes to see the future of a building, you have to close your eyes and let your hands do the seeing. Walk through your childhood home in your mind. And notice how each room appears without effort: the creak of the third stair, the way sunlight pools by the kitchen window. Now imagine scaling that mental map to something monumental. The method of loci, an ancient memory technique, didn't just help orators remember speeches, it became the invisible scaffolding for civilizations. By assigning architectural elements to vivid mental rooms, master builders could stroll through entire cities in their minds long before the first stone was laid. Parthenon's proportions might live in an imagined courtyard, its columns lining an avenue of memory, while the curve of a dome nestled in the mind's eye like a treasured heirloom on a mental shelf. The Roman architect Vitruvius hinted at this when describing how designers walked through projects before construction. Medieval cathedral builders took it further, associating each chapel with saint stories. The radiant window became Saint Denis holding his severed head. The crypt's arches echoed Mary's sorrows. These weren't just mnemonic devices, they were cognitive blueprints where emotion anchored geometry. A Byzantine engineer visualizing the Hagia Sophia might link its pendentives to four gospel writers, their symbolic stability reinforcing the structure's actual physics. The more vivid the mental image, the more unshakable the design. What made this method so powerful was its adaptability. When Inca planners designed Machu Picchu's terraces, they could place each retaining wall along a familiar mountain path, testing sightlines against remembered peaks. Japanese castle architects visualized complex joinery as stacked poetry scrolls in a mental terrum. Even Stonehenge's builders likely used the surrounding landscape as memory anchors. That outcrop marking the summer solstice stone, that distant tree lining up with the heel stone's shadow. The world itself became their sketchpad. Modern neuroscience confirms the genius behind this approach. Our brains recall spatial information 3 times more accurately than abstract data. When London's medieval masons memorized Westminster Abbey's floor plan as a spiritual journey, each bay representing a station of the cross, they were hacking their own biology. The same mental circuitry that recalls your first apartment's layout could hold the precise angle of a flying buttress, provided it was tied to a potent enough image. The legacy lingers in surprising places. Next time you assemble flat-pack furniture by picturing the finished piece, or a chef plates a dish by imagining its final appearance, you're tapping into the same cognitive toolkit that once built the pyramids. These ancient planners understood something we're only now rediscovering. The sturdiest structures aren't just made of stone and mortar, but of the memories and metaphors we wrap around them. When the wind whistles through the ruins of Persepolis, it's not just moving through columns, it's wandering the hallways of a mind palace that outlasted empires. Deep in the savannah, a towering termite mound stands like a silent sage, its porous walls breathing with the rhythm of the wind. While modern architects rely on complex HVAC systems, these tiny insects perfected passive ventilation millions of years before humans discovered thermodynamics. Ancient builders recognized this genius when Egyptian engineers designed the Great Pyramid's mysterious shafts. They weren't just aligning them with stars. Those narrow passageways function like a termite mound's chimneys, channeling air currents to regulate humidity and preserve the pharaoh's chamber. No scrolls dictated this technique. It was written in the desert winds and the behavior of creatures barely bigger than a grain of sand. The brilliance of this biomimicry lies in its simplicity. Termite mounds maintain a constant internal temperature despite scorching days and chilly nights, thanks to an intricate network of vents that rise and fall like living lungs. Zimbabwe's Eastgate Center, a modern office complex, uses this same principle to stay cool without air conditioning, but the pharaoh's architects discovered it first. By studying how air flowed through gaps in limestone cliffs or how beetles burrowed to escape heat, They turned observation into engineering. The pyramid's descending passage stays a steady 20 degrees Celsius year-round, not because of calculations, but because its angle mirrors the natural caves where early humans took refuge from extreme temperatures. Bees offered another masterclass in structural efficiency. The honeycomb's perfect hexagons demonstrate nature's insistence on maximum strength with minimal material, a principle the Maya embodied in their corbelled vaults. At Uxmal, the governor's palace features ceiling stones stacked in interlocking patterns that distribute weight like wax cells in a hive. Roman concrete, mixed with volcanic ash, mimics the crystalline structures found in seashells, gaining strength over time just as coral reefs do. These weren't conscious imitations, but intuitive understandings that the natural world held blueprints more reliable than any human sketch. What's astonishing is how these organic strategies transcended cultures. In Yemen's Shibam, mud brick high-rises stay cool through wind-catching turrets modeled after acacia tree canopies, just as Persian Badger's wind towers function like wooden termite mounds. The lattice screens of Jaipur's Hawa Mahal create the same cooling effect as a beehive's ventilation. Their intricate patterns calculated not with rulers but by observing how breezes moved through forest leaves. Even the spiral staircases in medieval castles follow the Fibonacci sequence seen in nautilus shells, each turn optimized for defensive positioning, just as the shell's chambers are perfected for buoyancy. Modern science confirms what ancient builders sensed. Biological designs often outperform human ingenuity. NASA studies termite mound porosity for Mars habitat designs, while architects analyze beaver dam hydraulics for flood-resistant buildings. Yet these discoveries feel less like innovation and more like remembering a return to the time when every architect was first a student of ants, every engineer an apprentice to the waves. The next time you feel a breeze funnel through a narrow alley or notice how a tree's branches distribute weight, you're glimpsing the oldest classroom on Earth, where the walls were built by worms, the ceilings by bees, and the lessons remain etched in stone for those willing to read them. On the slopes of Rono Roroku, where half-carved moai giants still sleep in the volcanic rock, the air thrums with the memory of festivals that once turned work into worship. When the season of Matariki arrived, marking the Pleiades' rise and the end of the sweet potato harvest, the islanders didn't just feast. They transformed into a living pulley system, chanting in unison as they rocked multi-ton statues upright, their voices syncing with the rhythm needed to walk the moai across the island. This wasn't just practical labor. It was ceremonial engineering where the beat of the Pena drums dictated the pace of progress as precisely as any modern project manager's timeline. Seasonal festivals became the invisible framework for monumental construction worldwide. In ancient Egypt, the inundation of the Nile wasn't just an agricultural event, it was a construction calendar. When floodwaters trapped farmers inland, they became temporary stonemasons, hauling blocks for pyramids under the coordination of Wepet Renpet New Year ceremonies. The rhythm of priestly chants during these festivals didn't just mark time, they paced the work crews, with each verse corresponding to a phase of hauling or setting stones. Misplace a hymn and you disrupt the workflow as surely as a missed crane signal today. The genius of this system lay in its dual purpose. Japan's Daikoku Matsuri at Izumo Taisha Shrine wasn't merely a celebration of the harvest moon, it mobilized entire villages to replace the shrine's thatch roofing in a single coordinated burst. The roofing layers worked in teams guided by the shrine maidens' dances, their movements mirroring the precise overlap needed for waterproofing. Similarly, the Pueblo peoples of Choco Canyon timed their great house constructions to the Shalako winter solstice ceremony, when stories told around fires doubled as verbal blueprints for the coming season's masonry work. What modern project planners might overlook is how these ritual timelines built in flexibility. Unlike rigid Gantt charts, festival-based scheduling adapted to nature's cues. If the salmon ran late in the Pacific Northwest, Kwakwaka'wakwa tribes delayed communal longhouse expansions until the Tseka winter ceremonies, but the delay wasn't wasted time. The intervening months were spent singing the house posts, carving sequences into memory, ensuring no mistakes when work resumed. In medieval Europe, cathedral projects paused during Lent not just for piety, but because fasting left workers too weak for heavy lifting, yet the downtime allowed apprentices to practice complex joints on miniature models. The true magic happened in the synchronization. When Bali's Odaland temple anniversaries rolled around, the entire village became a self-organizing construction crew. Goldsmiths refurbished shrines during the metalsmiths' feast day, while masons realigned gates during the earth goddess's worship, each trade's sacred calendar slot ensuring specialized labor flowed seamlessly. Even Easter Island's statue transport likely exploited the mana spiritual power generated during festivals, where collective belief may have reduced the perceived weight of the moe through psychological synergy, much like the firewalking rituals where focused chanting suppresses pain. Today's construction sites could learn from this ancient choreography, the raising of Amish barns in a single frolic, or the Minga tradition where Andean communities build schools in marathon communal sessions, prove that ritual rhythm still outpaces spreadsheets for certain projects. When the last moe was toppled and the festivals faded, Easter Island didn't just lose its statues, it lost the metronome that had turned chaos into coordinated achievement. The stones didn't fall because the people forgot how to carve them, but because they stopped singing them upright. The Tower of Pisa didn't just lean, it taught. When its foundation began sinking into the soft soil of the Tuscan plain in the 12th century, the builders didn't see catastrophe, they saw a living textbook. Each centimeter of tilt became a cautionary tale passed down through generations, not as a failure, but as a mnemonic device etched into the landscape. Remember Pisa, masters would whisper to apprentices centuries later as they tested soil by pressing damp clay between their fingers or observing which wild grasses took root. The tower's famous slant wasn't just an engineering quirk, it was a visceral, unforgettable lesson in hydrogeology, made unforgettable precisely because it went so spectacularly wrong. Ancient builders understood something modern engineers often forget. Disasters make the best teachers. When the great lighthouse of Alexandria collapsed after an earthquake in the 14th century, the rubble didn't vanish into history. Arab architects meticulously documented how its limestone blocks had fractured, noting which joints held and which crumbled. These observations birthed the Kadad mortar technique, a waterproof blend of lime and volcanic ash still used in Yemen's skyscrapers today. The cracks became a kind of structural storytelling, where every fissure whispered secrets about load distribution and lateral forces. Oral traditions transformed these calamities into lyrical warnings. Hawaiian kahuna master builders composed Oli chants about the fate of a Heiau temple that slid into the sea, its verses encoding the exact angle at which coastal foundations needed to be stepped. In Nepal, the collapse of a pagoda during a festival became a cautionary Dohori folk song, its refrain reminding masons to always let fresh mortar dry completely before adding weight. These weren't just stories, they were error codes set to music, ensuring the same mistake couldn't slip through unnoticed twice. The brilliance of this system lay in its emotional resonance. A dry manual might list soil compression rates, but a gripping tale about the bell tower of Bruges, which sank unevenly until its bells could no longer chime, made builders feel the consequence of rushed foundations. Gothic cathedral walls that bulged under faulty buttresses weren't just repaired. Their distorted shapes were left as visible scars, teaching apprentices to read outward curves as warning signs. Even the Romans honored this tradition. When the amphitheater at Phidne collapsed in 27 AD, killing 20,000, Emperor Tiberius didn't just punish the builders. He mandated that all future venues be tested by having legionnaires jump in unison, turning catastrophe into a standardized safety check. Modern construction could learn from this embrace of failure. The Leaning Tower of Pisa's eventual stabilization in 2001 didn't erase its lesson, it added a new chapter. Engineers used the same soil extraction techniques that medieval well diggers had employed, proving that ancient fixes often hold modern wisdom. Today, when Tokyo's skyscrapers swayed gently during earthquakes or London's Millennium Bridge was retrofitted after its infamous wobble, we're continuing that ancient dialogue between collapse and correction. The stones remember what we too often forget, that every flaw is a fossilized lesson waiting to be unearthed. By the 16th century, something profound began slipping through humanity's fingers, not just knowledge but the very way we held it. As paper scrolls replaced oral epics and printed manuals supplanted apprenticeship songs, construction became less about the body's wisdom and more about the eye's obedience to lines on a page. The rise of standardized education didn't just change how we learned, it rewired how we remembered. No longer did a mason feel the perfect mortar mix in the flex of his wrist, or a carpenter hear the right joint angle in a workshop chant. The tactile symphony of building faded to a whisper, drowned out by the scratch of quills on vellum. Yet stubborn remnants refused to vanish. High in the Alps, guild masons still passed down secret hand signs. A thumb hooked behind the index finger signaling the ideal slope for a snowproof roof. A palm tapped twice against the heart confirming load-bearing integrity. These gestures aren't just tradition, they're a silent rebellion against the flattening of knowledge into ink. In Kyoto's temple workshops, Miyadeku carvers mark wood with symbols only initiates understand. A crescent moon indicating grain direction, 3 stacked lines warning where knots will weaken the timber. To the untrained eye, they're mere scratches. To the craftsman, they're a living lexicon, each glyph compressing centuries of tactile insight into a single stroke. The shift wasn't instantaneous. Early printed architectural manuals often included marginalia like, "as the master's foot dictates," ghostly acknowledgments that some truth still lived in flesh, not type. Renaissance architect Filippo Brunelleschi famously refused to document the dome-lifting machinery used for Florence's cathedral, insisting the device could only be understood by watching it in motion. His contemporaries complained, but he grasped a fundamental truth: certain knowledge resists fossilization. Like trying to capture a dance in a dictionary, some skills dissolve when pinned to paper. Nowhere is this tension more vivid than in the Kyogen plays of Japanese carpentry. These comedic skits, performed at guild initiations, depict apprentices disastrously misreading blueprints, sawing beams too short, or installing rafters upside down until an elder intervenes with a folk song that magically sets things right. The message is clear: diagrams deceive, the body remembers. Even today, when a Tokyo high-rise rises with computer-cut steel, somewhere in the countryside a shrine is being rebuilt using only the Kyuden oral secrets about which cedar trees sing in the wind, or how to spot the dragon spine grain pattern that ensures a column will stand a millennium. What we lost wasn't just efficiency, but a way of knowing that engaged all the senses. Modern engineers might marvel at Inca mortarless walls, but few could replicate their secret. Builders licked each stone to taste its mineral content, ensuring compatible pieces would weather identically. Medieval glassmakers judged furnace temperatures by the hue of their own sweat sizzling on the furnace rod, a calibration no thermometer could match. These were sciences of the flesh, as precise as they were unrecordable. Yet the old ways cling in unexpected corners. NASA engineers troubleshooting the International Space Station sometimes resort to kinesthetic memory, recreating faulty component installations with their hands to intuit solutions. Traditional stonemasons in Portugal's Monsanto village still select granite blocks by ear, tapping them with hammers and listening for a pitch that signals structural integrity, a technique seismologists now confirm can predict fracture points. Even the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a judge's gavel echoes the ancient practice of using mallet echoes to test a building's soundness, proving that some forms of knowledge refuse to be fully transcribed. The tragedy isn't that we moved forward, but that in our rush to standardize, we forgot how much wisdom lives in the spaces between words, in calloused fingertips that sense a wood's weakness, in the lullabies that encode earthquake-resistant joinery, in the way a master's pause before striking a chisel speaks volumes no manual could contain. The parchment may last longer than the voice, the hard drive outlived the hand, but somewhere, a builder still touches stone and remembers what ink could never teach. Open any modern blueprint, and you'll find a rigid grid of lines and numbers, precise, unchanging, final. But unfold the mental blueprints of an ancient builder, and you discover something fluid, alive, responsive to the whisper of wind through a canyon or the way a particular stone sings when struck. Our contemporary plans freeze a design in time, while their methods let knowledge breathe, adapt, and evolve with each new project. Consider the Gothic cathedral builders who adjusted vault heights based on the quirks of local limestone, or the Inca engineers who tweaked terrace angles after observing how rainwater carved the Andes. Their blueprints weren't locked in ink. They lived in the collective muscle memory of generations, refined by countless hands and eyes. This adaptability wasn't just practical, it was cultural. A Maori meeting house's carvings might shift subtly with each reconstruction, reflecting the tribe's evolving stories. Japanese shrine carpenters still adjust joint techniques based on the spiritual energy they sense in a particular cypress log. Compare that to today's construction sites, where a single deviation from the approved plans can trigger costly revisions. Ancient methods honored the reality that no two stones, no two trees, no two builders are identical. Their systems embraced variability as a feature, not a flaw, the cost of our precision, a kind of creative atrophy. When every measurement is predetermined, there's little room for the happy accidents that birthed the Parthenon's subtle curves or the Hagia Sophia's daring pendentives. Modern architects confess that over-reliance on 3D software can dull spatial intuition, like a pianist who forgets how to improvise after years of rigid sheet music. The medieval mason feeling his way toward a perfect arch through trial and error wasn't just building, he was problem-solving in real time, his hands and mind engaged in a dialogue no static diagram could replicate. Yet fragments of this wisdom persist. In Portugal, dristone wallers still listen to rocks as they fit them together, sensing vibrations that indicate stability. Japanese timber framers use sumitsubo ink lines that fade over time, forcing apprentices to internalize proportions rather than rely on permanent marks. These aren't romantic anachronisms, they're reminders that the most enduring structures emerge when knowledge lives not just on paper, but in the bones, the breath, and the shared memory of those who build. The irony is palpable. We've never had more tools to document designs, yet we're losing the ability to hold them in our hands. Revolutionary architecture firms are turning back the clock with a twist, using cutting-edge virtual reality to channel ancient memory techniques. At Foster plus Partners London studio, designers now navigate digital replicas of unbuilt hospitals and skyscrapers wearing VR headsets, rehearsing spatial relationships just as Gothic cathedral builders once mentally walked through their memory palaces. The Neurochicha team discovered something astonishing. When architects physically move through VR models before construction, they intuitively correct design flaws that would have slipped past flat blueprints, echoing how Inca engineers adjusted terraces by pacing the mountainside. This blend of primeval spatial cognition and modern tech yields buildings that feel uncannily right, like the Shenzhen Airport's bamboo-inspired terminal where passengers instinctively find their way without signage. Acoustic engineers are taking cues from the Hypogeum's resonant chambers too. The new Bloomberg European HQ in London features ceiling panels tuned to the same frequency as Malta's ancient temple's 110 Hz, the pitch shown to reduce stress hormones in lab studies. Workers report feeling focused yet calm under these sound-optimized vaults, proving 6th millennium BC builders understood neuroacoustics better than we realized. Meanwhile, Barcelona's Torre Glories incorporates wind-activated resonators in its facade that mimic Mayan ball courts' thunderous echoes, transforming breezes into ambient soundscapes while passively ventilating offices. The most radical revival is happening in sustainable design. Zaha Hadid architects recently collaborated with Yemeni masons to adapt 2,000-year-old Shibam Tower techniques for Dubai's Aleph Tower, using mud brick cooled by wind catchers, a method that slashes air conditioning needs by 70%. In Brazil, Studio MK27 rainforest homes employ fractal-based layouts copied from abandoned Maya cities, where self-similar room clusters create natural airflow without mechanical systems. "We're not copying antiquity," explains lead architect Marcio Kogan. "We're relearning how to listen to climate the way builders did before thermostats." Perhaps most unexpectedly, these ancient approaches are solving modern construction's labor crisis. Facing skilled mason shortages, Japanese firm Shimizu Corporation trained robots using recordings of Miyadeku temple carpenters' hammer strikes. The machines now replicate traditional joinery with eerie precision by following the same rhythmic cues human apprentices memorized through song. Similarly, when Notre Dame's restoration hit dead ends, archaeologists played 13th century guild chants recorded in surviving European lodges. The rhythms unexpectedly revealed forgotten vaulting sequences when matched with laser scans of the original masonry. This isn't nostalgia, it's evolution. Just as Roman concrete self-heals using volcanic ash recipes we only recently decoded, tomorrow's smart cities might hum with the integrated wisdom of 10,000 years of builder lore. The irony, our hyper-digital age is rediscovering that the most advanced design tool isn't software, it's the human capacity to feel space, hear materials, and remember through storytelling, exactly as the ancients intended. The future of architecture might just be written in the oldest language we know, the one spoken by hands running over stone, by feet pacing sacred geometry, by voices chanting proportions into being across millennia. Ancient builders didn't forget blueprints, they transcended them. Their genius wasn't in discarding plans, but in embedding them so deeply into the fabric of daily life that stone seemed to shape itself. The chants of Egyptian masons weren't just songs, they were algorithms set to rhythm. The knots in an Inca Quipu weren't mere records, they were three-dimensional equations. These builders treated memory not as a storage system, but as a living, breathing collaborator, one that danced in the flicker of firelight during storytelling, hummed in the repetitive motions of apprentices, and echoed in the alignment of temples with the stars. Consider the resilience of this approach. When Spanish conquistadors burned Mayan codices, they assumed they'd erased a civilization's knowledge. But the real library wasn't on parchment. It was in the way a grandmother patted tortillas into perfect circles, teaching the geometry of cornmeal and water that also governed the curvature of ceremonial ball courts. It was in the muscle memory of Andean farmers rebuilding terraces after earthquakes, their hands remembering what their ancestors' hands had known, how to read the land's contours like a language. Unlike our fragile servers and brittle hard drives, these systems couldn't be destroyed with a single flame. They were distributed, decentralized, woven into the very rituals that kept communities alive. Now, as rising seas erode our coastlines and heatwaves buckle our roads, their wisdom whispers to us. Dutch engineers battling flooding are reviving medieval sand motor techniques, letting natural currents sculpt protective barriers instead of fighting them with rigid concrete. Architects in Mumbai study stepwells, those ancient subterranean labyrinths that cooled cities passively for centuries. Even NASA Mars habitat designs now incorporate puebloan thermal mass principles, where thick walls absorb daytime heat and release it slowly at night. The solutions we desperately need might not lie in futuristic tech, but in relearning how to listen, to the way wind sculpts dunes, to the stories encoded in indigenous fire management practices, to the quiet intelligence of materials we've forgotten how to feel. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about recognizing that the Great Pyramid's builders achieved near-perfect squareness, not because they were primitive geniuses, but because they trusted incremental, embodied knowledge over abstract perfection. A medieval cathedral rose over centuries because each generation added to a collective memory, adjusting for settling foundations and changing aesthetics without needing a master plan locked in some vault. Their blueprints weren't lost, they were written in the calluses of stonemasons' hands, in the seasonal patterns of bird migrations that signaled when to harvest timber, in the way moonlight illuminated a quarry's floors on certain nights. So here's the real question. What could we create if we stopped outsourcing memory to external devices and reclaimed some of that visceral, lived intelligence? Imagine construction crews trained not just to read schematics, but to sense when a beam's grain is singing at the right pitch. Picture urban planners consulting oral histories of monsoon patterns before paving over wetlands. Envision a world where every child learns, as the Dogon of Mali do, to chart star movements through the rhythm of their footsteps in the dust. The ancients left us more than ruins, they left an invitation. To build not just with our minds, but with our hands, our voices, our collective stories. The choice is ours. Keep stacking brittle towers on the shaky foundation of disconnected data, or weave our knowledge back into the world the way they did, durable, adaptable, alive. Hit like if you believe the future of building might just lie in the past, and share in the comments. What forgotten technique would you revive today? Don't forget to subscribe. We're just scratching the surface of history's hidden